Very good afternoon. Welcome to segment 2. Everything you wanted to know about Northern Soul, but were afraid to ask. It's a great title, isn't it? And we've got 2 guests along with me. We've got hundreds of years of experience. We think we know it all, but we probably don't. But first of all, let me introduce you to 2 icons of the Northern Soul DJ scene, Colin Curtis and Richard Searling. This was a great Richard. This was a Colin song, Purple Haze.
Yes, it was.
I remember it, yeah.
I sang on it.
Great. You hear a little bit of music in the background. These songs were primarily Richard and Colin's. There might be a sneaky one from me in there that I take claim to, but they were primarily Richard and Colin. Let's get things underway, fellas. I'll start with you, Richard. Imagine you had never been or heard of Northern Soul. It never, ever became part of your life. You're a young man. What would you have been? What kind of person would you have been? What profession would you have started with?
It just frightened me to think what might have happened to me if Northern Soul hadn't sort of steered me through, for want of a better word. My parents were horrified that I would ever move away from what they intended I should do, which was be a school teacher. So I did, I think about a year and a half at Didsbury College, just outside Manchester, even teaching practices in schools, but just with the people that were there. I was what they called a day student, and the rest of them were all, Southerners, that like playing Paranoid in the canteen and what have you, where I'd find a junk shop in Didsbury that I knew every Monday morning, don't ask me how, had new J-Boy demos in. And then it progressed to, spending more time at Ralph's Records around Moss Side. I just wasn't very good at college, so I was lucky that the interest in soul music led me from being a collector to ultimately a DJ. But yeah, school teacher, to answer your question.
But you grew up in a pretty big soul town, didn't you? Bolton. You're a Bolton guy.
Well, it was then. The Cromwellian Club was the main club. That was a fantastic club, cellar club. Unsafe, I think, now. I mean, the staircases and everything were so rickety. But I can remember the DJs there playing things like Billy Stewart's Summertime, those really great wheel-type records. So, yeah, but Bolton was good. And there was a fantastic record shop there. I shouldn't go without mentioning a guy called Dave Young. And Dave Young was a DJ, and he'd open his record shop in Bolton on a Saturday morning. It was above a taxi rank on Branchegate. It would only be open on Saturday morning, and he would have a book on the counter with all the records that he got in. So you had to ask, and my future wife Judith worked there, so that's when I first got to meet Judith.
Colin Curtis, you've been around longer than us.
Are you sure?
Stoke-on-Trent, 60s. Imagine you never heard of Northern Soul. You're leaving school. So it would have been the hits of the time, the Marmalade, to Jimi Hendrix, to Pink Floyd, See Emily Play.
So
you could have gone down that road.
That would have been the route. Without music, I don't think I would be alive. I don't think I would exist without music. So it just would have been another musical route. I saw Hendrix in '67, and I worked for local agents. So I introduced Led Zeppelin. I introduced The Who. I introduced Atomic Rooster. I introduced David Bowie. I introduced Roxy Music. So there was always going to be that option, and at school, pirate radio had already taken me in a musical direction, and I mean, in the end, of course, I chose the black music direction, but it would have had to be music. There was nothing else. I wasn't not good academically, I just didn't want to do it. I wasn't interested. If I wasn't interested, it didn't happen.
It kind of links to me. I'm pretty much the same. I was saying backstage, my mum was in HR If you think back to the 60s and 70s, I think they were called personnel officers back then, but she was in HR. So I fell out of love with school at 14. I mean, we got to 15. These were the days, by the way, when you could leave school at 15. So I had no intention of going any further, but she said, well, there's no problem, you know, I've got a lot of contacts, I'll get you a job Monday. No CV, no even interview. I'll call John, you'll start Monday. But that wasn't to be, because by then I'd already started to hear, gotta have you love the Sapphires, the 81 Canyon, the Kisses on Lost Night.
I remember when after I dipped out of college, I did an awful 9-month period working for the DHSS, or the sort of dole office.
That's why I got no money.
Oh, no.
He stopped it.
in Salford. And my job was on the Thursday. In those days, you were paying people. I'm not sure it wasn't pre-decimalisation. You were actually paying the people that were due the money actually on the counter. And my job was Thursday. It was the women's box. And, you know, it was just a real eye-opener. It was unbelievable, you know, but dreadfully boring. And I hated it. And it was just such a release to get a chance conversation one night at the Pendulum with Barry Tasker, who's one of the great DJs, who said, look, we've got a warehouse here in Manchester. They send people like you to America. Don't pay any money, but, you know, you pick up some fantastic records while you're out there. And that was the start of it. And I often think if that Sunday night hadn't happened back in 73, then I don't know what I'd have ended up. Like Colin, like you, I probably wouldn't be around. Music's been absolutely everything.
Yeah, 67. They were fed up with me at the DHSS because I was there every week trying to get some money. I said, how in hell do you expect me to buy any records if you don't give me any money? He said, well, have you applied for a job? I said, I'm not interested in a job. I just need some money to get some records. But 67, I signed for Mecca organisation and was given a Thursday night to play soul. But I also played, you know, commercial music on a Saturday. I did a kids session on a Saturday morning. But on a Tuesday night, between 67 and 1970, this is a Tuesday night, school night, we would have Billy Preston live, we would have Bobby Hebb live, we even had Gary Glitter live. Gary Glitter was the busiest night ever in that venue. Sam and Dave, Arthur Conley, Jackie Wilson. This was happening to me. I'm 16, 17, 18 years old. And I wasn't just listening to the music, I'm talking to these people. So it was just mind-blowing, looking back at it, mind-blowing.
So starting our DJ careers, a lot of you probably know little snippets of where we're all from, how we came about. I first encountered Colin before I met Richard at the Golden Torch. Any old-timers went there? Golden Torch in Stoke-on-Trent? Couple at the back, yeah.
Some in the cemetery.
Yeah, a lot I would think. But that was my first all-nighter, and Colin was one of those figures that I remember playing Purple Haze and Sliced Tomatoes and everything else. And so that got me hooked. And when the Torch closed, there was that middle period where Wigan hadn't opened, and I met a guy called Bob Hinsley, from the Bolton area, who said, you want to come up to Varvar's in Bolton? We'd already had a sample of a club called Trogs in Bolton, which I didn't like that very much at all. I had my bag stolen. So I thought, I don't fancy going back to Bolton again. But I'm so glad I did, because the DJ on the night that Bob had said was, hey, you know, Les Cackel, ex-Wheel is there. So I thought, oh, crikey, that's another big figure. But the star of the show was not Les Cackel. It was a guy playing There's a Ghost in My House. I'd never heard that before. Take Away the Pain Stain. It's Against the Laws of Love. The Volcanoes. Richard Searling. So that was the first time I encountered Richard.
Les Cackel. One of the loveliest people
he was brilliant.
Ever meet.
He was lovely.
Twisted Wheel DJ, of course.
He was.
And just the most remarkable man. I mean, we just miss him so much. He was a stalwart at the Mecca as well.
Yeah.
And his taste, that exquisite taste, you know, the floaters, that was the sort of stuff that Les enjoyed.
Yeah, he was a great pair of ears.
Yeah, and Varvar's was great. I mean, I met people there that then encouraged me when the next phase happened, which you had a hand in as well.
I did, and I dined out on it, Richard, I have to tell you. I recommended Richard for a job at Wigan Casino, and wow, he made a much better job of it than me. I was out the door within 2 years, but Richard stayed almost to the end, in fact, up to a week before.
Something like that, 2 weeks before.
And what a job he did, because he went right through. It's very difficult, you know, when you think back to that period. You know, Wigan Casino comes in for all kinds of praise and criticism as well. When people are young, if you've got a venue that's on every single week, to be on for 8 years, the musical roller coaster is going to be, it's going to be very strange indeed. Weird pop music, Northern Soul stompers, modern soul is going to come into the mix. But Richard did it better than anybody, because he saw the different trends and tried to, you know, keep it real, and did do, in fact. Which then brings us on to the three of us being involved in the very early 70s in a battle, really, because Colin was the most experienced, and of course he'd come from the Golden Torch, and we were at Wigan, the underdogs, unknown guys, up against Colin Curtis and Ian Levine. So Wigan v Blackpool, the rivalry started. What do you remember about those days, Colin?
When the Golden Torch closed in 1973, something to do with chemicals. I looked all around the map. I couldn't find any chemical factories anywhere near, so I don't know why that had caused the closing of the Torch. But I got a phone call also from the local Tiffany's manager, who told me that he'd seen what was happening at the Golden Torch in the papers, the police looking to close it, and if I didn't pull out of there, he wouldn't be able to keep employing me at Tiffany's in Newcastle-under-Lyme, and I was doing 500-600 on a Sunday. And during that period, after the Torch had closed, we got a guy, an assistant manager from Blackpool Mecca, called Tom West, who came down to be with us for he was there about 3 months. And the original Blackpool Mecca nights with Tony Jebb and Les Cacao, and of course records supplied mainly by Ian Levine. During that period, the Torch had actually closed down Blackpool Mecca because everybody was coming to the Torch because it was an all-nighter. And eventually I was probably part of the demise of Blackpool Mecca, in the sense that we were an 8 till 2 venue. But the music at the Mecca had taken a different direction as well. I mean, when I went back to the Mecca originally, we were still playing a lot of Torch records. This is 73, it's myself and Keith Minshall. Keith Minshall, probably the most underrated and one of the greatest ever Northern Soul DJs, who sadly left us on his just after his 70th birthday. But Keith was a massive influence on me, and you know, we trawled all the shops for probably 8 years during that period. But he ended up at Wigan. He ended up being, you know, playing a big role at Wigan.
He certainly did.
But Blackpool Mecca, yes, that first phase, and then the second phase with Ian Levine, we kind of changed the rules. We decided that the music needed to move on. So between 7:30 and 9 o'clock each week, you would hear records that weren't played in the main body of the night. So like unknown records, but it was 90 minutes solid every week. So people then started to come and, you know, to hear and to learn those records, so then we could move them on. So that period with Levine, between 73 and 78, yeah, we were up against Wigan, but yeah, I mean, musically we carried on going in a different direction, yeah.
I think initially, I'll hand to Richard in just a moment. I think initially, we never even thought of it as a versus Blackpool, because we were...
No, Blues and Soul and black music thought it was a good way to keep something rolling in the magazine.
It was. And if you looked on the team sheet, you would think, well, crikey, they've got some experience, they've got the records, what have Wigan got? But we came back, didn't we, Richard? We came out the trap quick.
Yeah, we did, certainly. I mean, I think the Wigan story really has got two parts, hasn't it? The first part, and we've heard from him today, Simon Susan, he absolutely established that venue. Without him, it would have withered on the vine. There's no two ways about it. To find records of the quality that he found, you know,
Just to put that in perspective, you were up against Ian Levine. Ian Levine was travelling to the States
Correct.
once or twice a year, coming back with 3,000 or 4,000 records, when people hadn't got 3,000 or 4,000 records in their life.
It was a joyous battle.
We got
joyous
access to music that wasn't available. So Susan filled that bill at Wigan.
Well, didn't he just? I mean, you know, to find records like the Connie Clarks of this world, the Frank Wilsons, the Moses Smiths, I mean, Willie Hutch, my goodness me. I remember the first time that was played at the casino, both sides on an acetator. He used to send them over, not on original records, by the way. He'd always send them over on audio disc acetates, which actually sounded better than the record.
So I've got to steal back Moses Smith, because Moses Smith was Graham Wall from the Catacombs.
Sound. Right.
And then he bootlegged it and speeded it up. So You Don't Love Me, the Moses Smith was...
See, we're still arguing.
Right. No, it's
we're
fine.
still arguing.
It's fine. I mean, I've often, other people have said it, and you might like this, you might not, that, you know, when you broke a record at Wigan Casino, you broke it to the whole of the UK. It did get to the parts that other venues maybe didn't quite get to.
Don't disagree.
Right.
I don't disagree.
But Susan was amazing. So the first phase until, am I right in saying 75, would you say? When he he got into his arpeggios and all that other stuff. There was then a bit of a lull with some pretty awful records played. And then, of course, John Anderson stepped in, and he led me by the hand, and many other DJs. People like John Vincent. I remember John arriving at the casino and said, I've got this record here, I've just got it from Soul Bowl this afternoon. It's by Lou Pride, it's going to be a monster. It was the first, and it was massive. Yeah. And that was John Anderson.
I think that lull, you're quite right there, Richard. I think that lull came because Blackpool was confusing us. It was. Colin and Ian were starting to get into what we now know as modern soul, and they'd had some big successes, none more so than In the Bottle, Gil Scott-Heron. I always remember that being a game changer. People may say, well, 7 Day Lover, James Fountain, you know, Mel Britt, these had tricky rhythms, and of course the Mecca were responsible for that and creative with it. But I do remember when In the Bottle came out, I'm sure the whole audience will agree with me. I mean, Colin very much responsible for that. I mean, I hear that all over the world. And that's a Colin Curtis record right there, without a doubt. In the Bottle.
In America, between 1970 and 73, to get on the radio stations to get played for American artists, you either had to be in the Temptations or ballads, or you had to be James Brown. So they weren't making records that you would ordinarily dance to. We'd had all that happen in the 60s when all the small labels that created the Northern Soul scene tried to copy Motown. And so you had that all over America. So whether you were in San Francisco, you'd have a version, New York, Detroit. They were all copying Motown. Now, then we had this lull where American radio was playing ballads, funk. It was completely different. So the end of 73, new releases were coming out on Spring, Garland Green, and then the major labels, RCA, Epic, Columbia, all started to release great soul records. And they were 85 pence each. We talk about John Anderson. John Anderson was probably even more important than Simon Susan in the big picture because he played a role for Wigan.
He did.
He played a role for Blackpool. He treated me like a king. I cannot thank John Anderson enough for the records that he gave to me. Records that are now £4,000, £5,000, £6,000. Ridiculous, you know. I mean, but an expensive record back in those days was £5 or £6. But I was earning 10, 20, 30 quid a week, so it was still quite expensive. But John Anderson played this incredible role. So I had John Anderson, I had Ian Levine, and now America was putting out new releases that you could dance to. So I couldn't live with myself if I didn't keep moving. You see, the names Northern Soul, Jazz Funk, House Music, they kind of happen after I'm playing the music. Not because it's me, but because the music, at some point, because these different genres become so popular, then they need a tag. But when I originally went to the Torch, nobody called it Northern Soul. Nobody called what was happening at the Wheel Northern Soul, not at that point.
Certainly not.
I was influenced heavily by the Wheel. I went to the Wheel twice, and the first night I spent in the Wimpy, that was very nice. They wouldn't let me in because they said I looked 12. I said, well, I'm actually 14, mate. And the second time, I didn't even get that far, and the Wimpy was shut, so I stood in the back of a van for 6 hours, which wasn't much fun. But you know, the continuity of it for me is what keeps me interested. I still play new music. I still, try and go down any genre that I feel I can add something to or give my viewpoint. I know where the bar is. I know if I can be of any use, and that's what I was doing back then. So 73 to 78, new music was coming in, and we're playing that along with Northern Soul. And probably the last Northern Soul record that I championed was probably Herbert Hunter, I Was Born to Love You, which came from John Anderson. And then he sold me a record by Ramsey and Co. for a $5.
Love Call. Yeah.
And that sounded more like Ramsey Lewis to me. Then, so we went and I developed what again later be called jazz funk. I discovered Patrice Rushen, I discovered Azar Lawrence, I discovered Donald Byrd, the Blackbirds, and life went on. And when I left Blackpool Mecca, people said to me, nobody will follow you to Manchester. The first Manchester club was Rafters. That was 1978 by then. The old days were still going at the Ritz. The old days are still going at Blackpool Mecca. But instead of Junior Walker and the All-Stars, instead of Edwin Starr, we suddenly got the Players Association, brass construction. But we still got 1,800 people, 2,000 people.
Well, that's a strange time for all of us. Our clothes changed overnight. There we were.
Yours may have changed. Mine have never changed. I always wear colourful stuff.
We were walking
always pick on something colourful. Get me something colourful, and I still wear it.
We were, if you remember, and I'm sure you were the same. You'd have the hold all, the swirly skirt if you're a lady, and you'd have your discotron in the 70s to pop the records in. You'd have your records in a bag. But all of a sudden, when like 1979, 1980 came, almost the death knells was being sounded for Wigan. We're all growing up. We're wearing different clothes and we're buying Herbie Hancock records and things like that.
Yeah, because 78...
Were we scared? Here's the question then. Were we scared that...
You were scared.
That Northern...
I wasn't scared.
That Northern was over. That was it. We'll never see... Danny and Sandy from Greece. Oh, we'll never see each other again.
Yeah. I think certainly when Wigan closed, that was certainly the case. And those that continued buying Northern Soul records to the likes of John Anderson, some 15, 20 years younger than myself, have made huge gains because they were able to buy anything you wanted between 4 and 50 quid. I think things like Lonely Girl by Eric Mercury were 50. That was about the most expensive record you could even find to buy then, because most people believed that American black music would continue in a soulful vein. It did until around 1983, and then we got into a situation where it became a little bit more, say, synthesized, but more run by accountants, and where the record companies would see somebody very successful. I mean, I suppose the 60s was the same with Motown, and try and make all their artists sound like this person that was already successful. So some of that sort of creativity seemed to dwindle. So I found myself thinking, well, I'm going to be a radio DJ and I'm going to play modern soul records and album tracks. And when I look back now and see some of the decisions I made, the collective decisions I made, letting records go, and I think we've all done it, I shudder. But you couldn't have predicted, I don't believe anyway, in 1981 that we'd be sitting here, my maths is terrible, how many years is that? It's something like 44 years later, and still be seeing so many people coming to a venue like this.
Well,
and loving the music.
I think the internet, no, we didn't know the internet would be invented, but of course when that came along, we could share it, couldn't we? We could share it. I mean, there's not a week goes by where I don't get asked a Wigan question. I'm sure you're the same, Richard, and
Nobody asked me about Wigan. They ask, which turn-off is it? I'm going shopping, but they never ask me about the casino.
We're gonna take some questions in just a moment, but I'll just wrap up this little bit of segment.
He's trying to run it now.
By saying the Northern Soul scene, it's global. It's all over the world. I remember when I used to travel throughout the US in the mid-70s, people, particularly Americans, used to say to me, yes, ask me two things. Did I know the Queen? And did I know any of the Beatles? Now, I've only got to be, well, all right, it could be a music store, it could be anywhere, but generally they say, you know, British? Yes. Northern? Totally changed. Everybody's aware. Are you proud of that? I certainly am.
Of course, yeah.
It was a secret society, wasn't it? We didn't really, as young men, we don't really want anybody knowing about. I certainly didn't want my friends to know. They said, "Where have you been this weekend?" You don't want to know. You carry on headbanging to Glitter and T-Rex.
I think when you reach our stage of life, you are proud to look back on your achievements and the scene's achievements, of course. Not the case when I was younger, I can assure you. It was very much, you know, I've got to have this before anybody else. And I don't want king of the cover-ups, you know what I'm saying? But there were reasons for that as well. But you, as you grow older, you change, don't you, in so many ways. You become more sort of, you see things more in a better perspective, I think.
Yeah. Colin?
What?
Are you proud? Are you proud, sir, of your achievements? Are you proud that we're all still talking? Are you proud we're here?
Yeah, I'm very proud that people have come to listen as well. 1967, so what's that? 33 plus the 25, so 58 years for me playing black music. And I'm massively proud. I mean, I'm massively proud of the history I've got with Northern Soul. I'm massively proud of jazz funk. I'm massively proud of the role I played in house music in the UK. I'm massively proud of jazz and jazz fusion. I put out albums on my own label. I put out EPs on my own label. I just keep on playing new music, but I've never always wanted to stay in the past. I'm excited by the next new record that I'm going to hear. Which genre it falls in doesn't bother me. I understand why people are attached to Northern Soul. I understand for some people it's been the whole life, and so they won't understand what I do. But it's always been new music. Gil Scott-Heron was pivotal. I can't tell you how much music I've played by Gil Scott-Heron over the years. I mean, the guy was the social commentary he made with his music still means everything today in America that it did back then. The world hasn't changed. The mess that we're in today that we see when we wake up every day, Gil Scott-Heron was talking about that a long, long time ago. So, yes, I'm immensely proud and immensely grateful that you've come to listen.
All right. Time for you to talk. Tall John's coming. Here he is. You know John, he always helps us out on these sessions. So please put up your hands if there's something you want to ask all three of us or an individual. Let me stand up a little bit and just steer John to one or two. I see two there, so let's get the first one in.
Thank you. Two questions really, both for Colin. I was very fortunate to travel down from Barrow-in-Furness, my hometown, in December 72, 73, to the Torch, to witness Major Lance's live performance. And the first thing that hit me when I arrived in Tunstall, which I'd never been to before, was I was asking people, where is the Torch? And you didn't really, I mean, obviously we're in the days before maps or didn't even have an A to Z of Stoke, even if one existed. But you could just hear this thumping sound emanating from some back street somewhere. And so basically you just followed the sound. And we turned down this little side street where there was just a row of terraced houses. And stuck right in the middle of these terraced houses was this building, which turned out to be the Golden Torch. And one thing that has always amazed me is, I mean, despite all the events that sort of caused its demise in the end, was just how much trouble did you have with the neighbours?
Right. Let's just address the first bit. Major Lance. I'd actually been doing some mobile disco work that night, and I got to the event about just under an hour before Major was due to go on. And outside was one of these old BBC buses that had got all the recording stuff in. I mean, in those days, you know, there was no video, no cameras, unfortunately. And I sat in there for about 10 minutes and just listened. You know, they were just making sure they got the sound recording right, because obviously they cut an album from that night. And I got inside the club, and Chris Burton, the manager, grabbed me and he said, "Get upstairs, get in the dressing room. He doesn't want to go on." I said, "Who doesn't want to go on?" He said, "Major Lance doesn't want to go on." Well, the biggest record at the Torch at that time was one of Major's records called "You Don't Want Me No More." And he'd never performed it anywhere, and he didn't know the lyrics. And so Chris Burton's frantically saying, "Is he ready?" I said, "No, he's not ready." I said to Major, "Do you know the words to He said, "Yeah, I remember that one." I thought, well, I'm not surprised. He's got the same fucking word all the way through it. But "You Don't Want Me No More." I said, "You know the chorus?" And I wrote down some of the lyrics for him that night. And I said, "Don't worry about, just repeat that verse and the crowd will sing the song." In the end, it didn't end up on the album, but we did get away with it. And Martin Ellis introduced him famously on that night. So to get him on the stage cost Chris Burton about a third of a bottle of whiskey, which he ripped off the optic and brought into the office, and Major just downed it straight away, went on, and the rest is history. Now, the Golden Torch is in Tunstall, and you did very well to get to Tunstall without, you know, you said the first thing that hit you. The first thing that normally hits you in Tunstall is either a bus or an old woman with a shopping bag. Tunstall was not everybody's idea. It was tucked away. And I'd been working at the Mecca the first time I went to the Torch was 68. So 67 now, I'm working in these big ballrooms, very posh, glass and chrome. And then the Torch was this black hole. But when I walked in there and heard the music in 68, I thought, this is like the inside of my head. I'm totally getting this. And because of my fanaticism, I eventually overtook the DJs. But in answer to your question, on an all-nighter, House Street went along there, and then maybe another 50, 60 yards down the next street, and there was a chip shop. And we used to say, if you're at the chip shop, you'll be in the Torch in just over an hour's time, because it would take the queue that long to get in there. But the magical thing, and I did do a program with the BBC where I took them back around that. As you get just to the end of House Street and turn in, the whole street was going boom, 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 boom. And how these people lived there, it was literally from where I'm standing to maybe the front row. That was the houses. There was a complete row of houses right opposite the Torch. Incredible. I don't know is the answer. In the end, when the police started to try and close the Torch because of the drugs, then the neighbours joined in. Yes, we've been complaining. They haven't been fucking complaining. But yes, we've been complaining for years. Well, it's only been going 12 months, the all-nighters, so no, you haven't. But yeah, I don't know. It was the 70s, and it was the 3-day week. It was whatever it was. You know, we just got through it.
Power cuts, I remember. Let's flick back to the gentleman just behind John. There we go.
Hi, I've got a question for Richard here. The idea of cover-ups is genius. It's so simple, it's genius. So where did the idea come from?
Jamaicans, as I'm led to believe, when they had the rival sound systems, they'd find a track that they'd hope the other guy across the way wouldn't have, and they'd get more dancing or the exclusivity. But it was protective as well, because what happened in the 70s, still happened today, is bootlegging. Because people had the assumption, well, nobody knows these guys, the tiny little label, nobody's going to bother if we run off 400 or 500 copies. And it used to happen all the time at the casino. Many of the records were bootlegged very quickly. And I always thought that was sad in some cases, because it killed some of them almost stone dead when they had more life in them. You've also got the what's the word I'm looking for? There's sort of an allure of a cover-up. There's a certain, and we need to find out. Do you know what it is? I don't know. I'm sure. I think it's so and so, and we'd also, when the record was uncovered for the DJ, that was a very painful experience. My most painful experience had been given a record by John Anderson. He'd gone into a record shop in New York, and this is how small the world is even back then. He'd failed to buy all 5 copies of this record and left one behind. Brought 4 back, gave me a copy. I covered it up. Sharon Scott. It was actually by an artist called Tamala Lewis. And I thought, you know, of all the records I've got here, John and the Weirdest, Joe Mapp, that nobody will ever find. It's such an obscure little label. This will be an exclusive for months, years for me. And about 3 weeks later, I was playing at the casino and somebody came up and said, Clarky's got one of them. And Ian Clark, the legendary DJ, record dealer, of course, it's a small world where record collecting is concerned. He'd gone to that record shop in New York and got the 5th copy that John didn't bring back, and he was playing it at Yates. But, you know, many cover-ups did stay rare for a long time, and if you talk about the Phantom Janitor, that's more important now to people in their minds than the Deadbeats, which is the original group, because we pummeled it for 2 years as the Phantom Janitor, and there was always an element of connectivity as well. So when I'd cover up like a Country Girl by Vicky Baines, I covered that as Christine Cooper because it's the same label. So I was sort of teasing the audience a little bit as well.
We did the same. I mean, I think is my microphone broke? Thank you. Pass it to me. At Blackpool Mecca, we reached a point, and it was mainly to do with bootleggers, not to do with. But then it becomes elitist because you've got away with it. You do it more, and it protects records. And in that battle between Blackpool and Wigan, that certainly played a role. In fact,
we didn't want the other DJs or any other, even at the casino. I didn't want the other DJs to know what it was.
Well, we put a whole advert in of made-up records, and then people are chasing fog. But I mean, one of the most famous ones was what was it? The Coasters, which we covered up. Yeah, one of the greatest Northern Soul.
Ian Levine gave me a real bum steer on that one.
Yes.
He said, because you're one of my closest friends, Kev, I can reveal it's called My Heart's Wide Open. But by the Steelers, because they covered it up as Freddie Jones, of course. My Heart's Wide Open. I said, thank you very much, Ian, for that. So I spent the next few weeks trying to find
looking for the record, didn't
exist.
Of
course,
that was a London lad that brought that record up, wasn't it?
Brilliant. Yeah.
And I don't know how many people know the story, but the weirdest thing is that many, many years later, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name, but he's from the southwest of England, Adi, I can't remember, no, it wasn't Eddie Crow. Anyway, but he found the original...
Oh, Adi Pierce.
Adi Pierce.
VJ Acetate by Jimmy Shepherd.
Jimmy Sherman,
you know the story. And it was cut before the Coasters, I believe, and was titled, guess what? You got it.
It was, yeah.
So the Coasters had Billy Guy had nicked the songwriting credits and retitled.
Yeah,
so there's another story there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Let's go to the floor again. John. It's all right. I've got, I couldn't see Rod there. I can't, I've got to come out and sort of look to see if there's anybody I know as they're putting their hands up. I don't think I know that gentleman, but if you can just whisk round there. So there's a big bright light shining right in. It's in your eyes, Richard. It's certainly mine. Oh.
Hi, good afternoon. Okay. Good question for all three of you, really. As a DJ on the scene now and working on radio as well, you guys, I don't mind admitting it, have been an absolute massive influence on my musical taste, which is great because going through from Northern Soul right through to jazz funk, brand new upfront music, what we're playing today. Who did you have back in your day? Who influenced you and your music?
Start with you, Richard. Let's start with Richard.
Okay,
Richard.
well, for me, I'm trying to think. I don't want to say the wrong DJ here. I like some of the DJs a lot on Radio Luxembourg. I remember Stuart Henry, Johnny Walker in particular. I remember hearing things like "Do What You Got to Do." It's not Northern. "Do What You Got to Do" by the Four Tops and Mike Raven played things like Vivian Reed, Lean on Me. These are all radio DJs. And then we were lucky enough as most cities were, in the early 70s to get independent local radio, and Piccadilly Radio, of course, had Andy Peebles and his Soul Train, and Andy was just buying the records from Spinning or wherever and treating us to them every Sunday night. And rest in peace, Andy. We lost him recently. He was the first ever DJ to have Northern Soul on his radio show, and he invited Ian Levine on, and I can still remember now the records that Ian played. I hope I can. Isle of Anne, Jody Mathis, and I can't remember the third now, I've said it, but everybody was anticipating Ian going on Andy's show, and everybody wanted to make sure that they were getting a good signal, so cars were driving to the top of hills, and also, so that's my answer to that. I suppose those three would be the ones.
Colin?
Mike Raven, yeah, Mike Raven, certainly radio. Emperor Roscoe was a massive influence on me. I'm a bit of a twat, so I kind of don't take any notice of anybody. I kind of like to make my own mind up, and what Richard's saying about other people not knowing your music. You part of. I mean, it's changed so much now because I grew up and my reputation is based on doing resident clubs, whether it's Blackpool, Mecca, Rafters, whatever it was. Nowadays, I turn up as a guest DJ, so the impact has got to be there. So, yeah, I'm going to dig probably deeper. So in those early days, yeah, very much. I mean, Roscoe's presentation, and I was lucky enough to work with him live a few times, and Mike Raven, brilliant radio show, and one of the first DJs to start playing what was then called R&B back in those days, and Soul Serenade would kick us off every week, the instrumental, Mike Cotton. But really, no, I mean, on the Northern Soul scene, Keith Mitchell was a massive influence on me. Jazz funk, no, because I was going into the jazz funk world and not a lot of people wanted to follow. A lot of DJs were like, "Ooh, let's wait and see. Hey, Colin, I'll hang on to me Northern a bit longer and see how it goes with that funny stuff." Because they're wearing plastic sandals and funny shirts, Colin. What's going on there? Well, they just dance to the fucking music, you prick. But no, I've worked with some great people. John Grant was a great, Mike Shaft. I had some great times with Mike. But actual music influence, and even now, if you listen to my radio shows, it's Colin Curtis. It's not really influenced by anybody.
Just a quick reminder, you worked with me, with Tiswas.
Tiswas, yeah, I was very good on that.
Remember?
Yeah, Tiswas, I do remember Tiswas.
We did a gig with Chris Tarrant.
And Split the Dog. I've got some pictures, yeah, with Bob Carroll jersey and Split the Dog. Yeah, but you didn't influence me at all, Kev, no. He's a nice lad, though.
So, not many influence. You see, I was into pop as well. I've got to be honest with you. I do like a lot of other kind of music. So, I wasn't probably tilted that much. I was more of a Tony Prince, Luxembourg, Roscoe, of course. And I did like a lot of DJs that kind of could do pop and soul at the same time. They were the ones that I thought, oh, crikey, I'd like to be him. Tony Jebb was a little bit like that. Definitely Martin Ellis. Martin Ellis was my first mentor. When I got the job at Wigan, I'd say I hadn't got a clue. I just got a bag of great records, and I thought, well, what do I do? Do I become Tony Prince here and start leaping around? Well, of course, that wouldn't have gone down very well.
Martin was...
He showed me.
He was a euphoric DJ. His enthusiasm and that came over as much as the music he played.
Yeah, he was.
He wasn't particularly a collector or anything, but he played the torch, of course. And
of course he did.
When Martin was on, you certainly knew, but he was great on the microphone.
He was. There's a great image, if you might find it on the internet, a great image of Richard, myself, and Martin at Wigan in the very early days. It's a really, really rare shot. I'm going to have to wrap this up now because our special guest from Philadelphia is waiting in the wings. But I do hope we will maybe do this again. Let's do a part. There's so much to talk about. Crikey, it's well over 50 years.
They haven't paid me for this one yet, so let's see if we do it again.
Yeah.
But I do thank you very much for joining us. My co-DJs.
Thank you, everybody.
My friends over half a century. Richard Searling, first of all. and Colin Curtis. Thank you.